What is up? I am dying, honestly. I just turned this on, OBS, and these are the enduring mysteries of room 1046. Oh my god. Also, I'm gonna turn it up. Lately, it's been turned down. I don't know why. Let's spook it up, dog. Kansas City? That's where, Mac Dre died. The CIA. They got Mac Dre. Alright, what was it? The
Standing
president?
tall on Baltimore Avenue since 1926 is the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri.
Whoa.
With over 450 rooms across 15 stories at the time of its inception, it has accommodated both locals and travelers alike for the last century, providing shelter and service to thousands of visitors from all different walks of life.
John Wick Hotel? Oh wait, this is a mystery room, huh? Ghosts?
Weddings, conventions, celebrities. The corridors of the president have seen countless faces come and go, and if its walls could talk, it could certainly share secrets aplenty.
Sorry. Someone was like, don't play with your hair. And I'm like, it gets in my face,
Yet,
and I have
there
acne.
is one story
It's not good for
that
me.
even the grand halls of this building cannot fully explain. A tale of murder so mysterious that it has haunted this hotel ever since.
Someone's gonna light my head on fire
casting
one
a
day.
dark looming shadow over its legacy and leaving behind an unsolved,
My tobacco's gonna catch up with me. Whoa, Enigma, that's the title of the video, 1046.
This is the story of room 1046.
2. It's gonna be a person behind all these. Obviously. Is it a ghost? I added the numbers, I got 2. And 2 to me is 2 people. You're like, what? And I'm like, my explanation for numbers is weird.
On the afternoon
like
of the 2nd of January 1935,
I don't know, sorry.
a man going by the name of Roland T. Owen checked in to the president, requesting specifically for an interior room several floors up, facing away from the street outside. He provided a Los Angeles home address to the front desk.
Anything that happens super far back, I'm like,
stay.
I don't know, dude.
Hotel staff later described him as looking early 20s with brown hair, a cauliflower ear, and a horizontal scar on the side of his scalp. He was well dressed with a dark overcoat, yet had no luggage or extra clothes with him, leading to the assumption that he was only planning to use the room for the day.
What does that mean?
After paying the clerk and receiving the key to room 1046, Randolph Probst, a bellboy at the president, accompanied Owen in the elevator, taking him up to the 10th floor. Owen told Probst that he had spent the previous night at the nearby Mulebach Hotel, but found their room rates too high, so decided to instead stay at the president.
Being edged.
It's unclear why Owen had no change of clothes or belongings with him if he had already stayed more than one night in the city. And small oddities like this would become a frequent occurrence in this case.
Oh,
Probst helped Owen into his room and observed him take out 3 items from his coat pocket and place them onto the bathroom sink. A hairbrush, a comb, and some toothpaste. They both then left the room, locked the door, and parted ways, with Owen leaving the building entirely. The unusual thing about the rooms at the president was that the locks on the doors could only be adjusted from the outside, meaning that guests were likely sleeping with their rooms unlocked, since it couldn't be secured from the inside.
Because presumably something's
Whether this was
happen.
an outdated system or a choice by the hotel at the time remains unclear.
Picking locks
Yet
back
the lack of security would be unthinkable in today's world.
Has to be super easy. Lockpicking lawyer.
Later that day, Mary Soptic, one of the hotel's maids, was doing her rounds cleaning the rooms when she walked into 1046 and found Owen sitting in the dark. Not realizing it was occupied, she apologized and began to leave, but he insisted she go ahead and clean the room with him present. As she did so, she noticed the curtains were drawn, with one faintly dim lamp illuminating the room. After a few minutes, Owen stood up to put on his
I
coat,
feel like we're not getting
brushed
all
his
the
hair,
information.
and told Soptic to leave the room unlocked once finished, as he was expecting friends to arrive later. He then left the room, with Soptic doing so moments later, leaving it unlocked as requested. A few hours later, at around 4 PM, Soptic was going room to replace fresh towels, and eventually made it back to 10:46.
How much time has passed?
Opening the door
It's like
revealed
10
a pitch black
to
room,
2?
with only the light from the corridor outside extinguishing the darkness.
And he was dead.
Upon entering, she faintly noticed Owen lying in the middle of the bed, fully clothed, presumably asleep, and possibly drunk.
Maybe not.
On the table, a note scribbled down simply said,
Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait.
Soptic quickly replaced the towels and left, leaving the door unlocked once more.
And he had to been.
Soptic begun her shift the next morning and eventually made her way to room 1046 at around 10:30 AM. The door was locked, leaving her to assume that Owen had left since the key could only work from the outside, so she opened the door with her spare. As it swung open, Soptic was met with an unexpected shock. Sitting in the dark once again, alone and in the same position as the previous day, was Owen, staring back at her. Apologising once more, Soptic began cleaning the room, later claiming that Owen appeared to look worried or afraid each time she saw him. All of a sudden, the phone rang, and Owen answered.
No, Don, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast. No,
And he
I am
did
not
have
hungry.
Still holding the phone, Owen then began asking Soptic about her job as she continued to clean the room, such as whether or not she was responsible for the whole 10th floor, and if the president was residential. After a brief
Presidential
conversation, Soptic finished her chores
the-
and left, leaving Owen once again
Oh,
alone in the
people
dark.
living on the floor. That makes sense. Like Sweet Life.
At
is
roughly
acting
4
coded.
PM,
Good
Soptic
reference.
returned to
Good
replace the
analogy.
towels in rooms on the 10th
Very
floor.
demure.
Upon approaching 1046,
Dude, what's up?
she could hear two men talking from within,
So that's Dawn, no?
so knocked out of courtesy. Expecting to hear Owen granting permission to come in, she instead heard a much deeper, much louder voice.
Who is it?
Sorry, it's the maid. Fresh towels?
We don't need any.
Soptic knew there were no towels in the room, as she had removed them herself that morning, yet obeyed the command of the mysterious voice regardless, and moved on. Around 7 AM the next day, switchboard operator Della Ferguson
Is he finally
began working
dead,
her
dude?
way through
I'm,
daily
like, wanting
wake-up
him
call
to-
requests to rooms in the President. As she got to room 1046, she noticed a light indicating that the phone in that room was off the hook,
Whoa.
and therefore unable to receive a call. She called for Probst to go and wake Mr. Owen up in person, and upon making his way up the elevator and to the door, he noticed it was locked with a Do Not Disturb sign hanging from the handle. He knocked loudly for a response and heard a faint voice telling him to enter and turn on the lights. However, he had forgotten to bring his key with him from downstairs. Assuming Owen was drunk, Probst shouted through the door to put the phone back on the receiver and left. Over an hour later, Ferguson went to try again, yet the phone still hadn't been hung up, so she sent another bellboy, Harold Pike, to investigate. This
What?
time,
He
Pike
was-
had a key, so let himself in and found Owen laying on the bed in the dark, naked and, as expected, completely intoxicated. Pike claimed to have noticed dark patches on the bedding around Owen as the ambient light from the hallway lit the room, but rather than getting a closer look, he quickly hung up the phone which had been knocked onto the floor, and left, locking the door behind him and reporting back to his manager. 2 hours passed by, and once again, an indicator on the switchboard suggested that the phone in room 1046 was off the hook. So Probst went back to investigate.
You would call 911
The do
or
not disturb
something,
sign
right?
was still present, and the door was still locked.
The guy didn't take
but
it
this
off.
time, Probst had brought his key. After knocking several times without a response, Probst unlocked the door and pushed it open, expecting to see a drunk Owen passed out on the bed. Instead,
He's dead.
he was met with a nightmarish and unimaginable scene. As the glow from outside seeped in, Owen could be seen on his elbows and knees, approximately 2 feet away from the door, with his head covered in blood. Probst immediately flicked on the light, yet to his horror, it revealed more of what looked to be Owen's blood, smeared and splattered all over the walls, ceiling and bed. In a panic, he quickly fixed the phone before rushing out to find help, and returned with the assistant manager. Yet this time, when they tried to open the door, it would only budge a few inches. Owen, in the time between being found and Probst returning, had collapsed by the exit, blocking them from entering 1046. After a brief struggle to regain the strength to move, Owen got up and sat on the edge of the bathtub as the 2 men came in to assist. Owen had been bound with cord, wrapped tightly around his heavily bruised neck, wrist and ankles. He also had stab wounds in his chest, which had punctured his lung, a deep cut on his arm, and his skull was fractured on his right side after multiple blows to the head. The police were called and joined a doctor from the nearby hospital, who questioned Owen, who had done this to him, after freeing him from the restraints. "Nobody," said Owen, in a semi-conscious state. After a brief back and forth with the officers, he tried to claim that he had simply fallen and hit his head on the bathtub, yet the injuries sustained and evidence of a struggle suggested otherwise. The doctor asked Owen if he was trying to take his own life, to which he denied, before suddenly collapsing and losing consciousness.
Oh, he died.
He was immediately rushed to hospital, yet by the time he arrived, he had fallen into a coma. And unfortunately, Owen died from his wounds in the early hours of the following morning.
So that guy was a 2? Oh.
Detectives believed without doubt that this case
was
was considered a homicide. Police determined that there was no way Owen's injuries were self-inflicted, and he could in no way have tied himself up, suggesting that at least one person was involved in his murder. The wounds were estimated to have been inflicted between the hours of 4 and 5 a.m. that day,
probably like a politician,
after analysing the moisture levels of the bloodstains on the walls. This ruled out the 2 bellboys being involved in the murder at the times they went to check on Owen. But of course, it doesn't mean they weren't able to commit the murder prior to their visits. There were no clothes other than the ones Owen was wearing, no formal identification,
who checked in though,
and no idea who may have known him. Even the hotel supplied toiletries, such as soaps, shampoo and towels, were all missing from room 1046. There was also no obvious murder weapon present, such as a knife or blade, that could have inflicted the deep stab wounds in Owen's chest. The only evidence they had was the following: a hairpin, a safety pin, an unlit cigarette, a small unused bottle of dilute sulfuric acid, and the necktie Owen was wearing, labelled as being made by the Botany Worsted Mills Company of Passaic, New Jersey. One of the 2 hotel room glasses was broken in the sink and missing a jagged piece, suggesting it could have been used to hit Owen over the head. Lastly, detectives found that the top of the telephone stand displayed 4 small fingerprints,
Oh, it's the
believing
guy
them
though.
to
He
be
hung up
female.
the phone. Huh.
Both Probst, Pike, and other hotel staff's prints were checked, yet none of them matched these marks in room 1046. With only a handful of
He
leads
hung
and
up the
limited
phone,
forensic
though, right?
technology at the time, investigators
Pike
knew
or the
this
other
wasn't
guy?
going to be a straightforward case to solve. And if it wasn't difficult enough already, the mystery was about to get a whole lot deeper when they
Oh,
tried
God.
to notify next of kin in LA. It turned out there was no Roland T. Owen.
The fake name.
So we are left with these questions. Who is this man in room 1046?
Toot.
Who murdered him and why?
Politician.
Who is Don?
Politician.
And why was he staying at the hotel in the first place? To answer these questions, detectives began first trying to
Brothel.
understand the true identity of the victim and began questioning staff and
No,
guests
did he,
of the
bro?
president.
Yeah,
This is
but
where the
I'm
mystery
pretty sure I'm right.
gets even deeper. On the 3rd of January, the second night of the case, at approximately 6 p.m, a 30-year-old woman from Missouri by the name of Jean Owen, seemingly no relation to Roland T. Owen, walked into the president and requested a room for the night for her and her boyfriend, Joe Reinhardt, who would join her later that evening. The clerk handed her the key to room 1048, directly next door to room 1046,
Oh,
and
what
she
did
made
they
her way
do
up
there?
the elevator. During their stay, both claimed to have heard various bouts of commotion across the 10th floor, with both male and female voices echoing loudly down the corridors, yet claimed to have never seen Owen at any point. Police were extremely curious of this witness, almost finding it hard to believe that someone with the same surname as the victim would just so happen to be staying in a room next door. Yet no further evidence linked her to the case, with investigators eventually disregarding her and her partner as potential suspects. Elevator operator Charles Blocher also confirmed unusually large amounts of people hanging around the 10th floor that evening, with a loud party bellowing in room 1055 deep into the night. Among the various visitors, Blocher recalled a woman entering the elevator in the first few hours of his midnight shift. Blocher, along with many of the staff at the president,
So there's a
assumed
party
her
at
to be a
10:55.
lady of the night, due to her having a reputation of regularly visiting male guests who lodged at the president over the years. Blocher took her to the 10th floor upon her request and made his way back down to the lobby. Yet
Well,
within
this is
5
back when they
minutes,
still have
he
hotel
was summoned back
operators.
up and once again greeted by the same woman. She told Blocher that she was due to meet her client, who she had already seen on previous occasions, in room 1046. She suggested that perhaps her client was instead in room 1024, since that was the only one with the light on, and so decided to stay on the floor whilst Blocher once again descended. 30 minutes later, Blocher would be summoned once again to the 10th floor, where he would yet again encounter this woman, this time wanting to go down to the lobby. She would return with another man later that evening and make her way with him to the 9th floor. Blocher
900?
described this man as being around 5'6", slender, wearing a light brown overcoat, a brown hat, and brown shoes. The woman would later descend from the 9th at 4:15 a.m.
What does it
before
matter?
eventually
Well, I guess
leaving the
that's
president, with
we'll
the
see.
man following suit around 15 minutes later. It's unclear whether or not this woman had anything to do with the case, or if she even knew the victim at all, as there are no records of her being traced after the incident. The only possible link is that she was supposedly meeting a man in 1046,
Yeah.
which can only be
That is
presumed
wild.
to be Owen. But with her struggling to find him that night, it's also possible that he wasn't who she was looking for. As for the man she took up to the 9th floor, it's possible he was just a client who had paid for her services that night, but there's every possibility that he too is linked to the case.
I mean, they could all be
There
that
is
one could
also
be isolated.
another reason why Owen may not have
That
been this
Owen
woman's
last name for
client
the
that
other
night,
lady, these are two
as there is a
coincidences.
chance that Owen wasn't at
But
the
I don't
hotel
think-
at all. At 11 p.m. that evening, Robert Lane was driving home on 13th Street near Lydia Avenue when he saw a man dressed in only an undershirt, trousers and shoes run in front of his car and signal for him to stop. As he did, the man immediately apologised, thinking Lane to be a taxi, but asked anyway if he could take him somewhere nearby where he could get one. Lane agreed and let him in, questioning his situation along the drive. The man seemed angry, expressing he would kill someone in retaliation for what had been done to him that night. Lane could see in the rearview mirror that the man had a deep laceration on his left arm, cupping it to catch the blood from spilling out into the car. He eventually dropped the man off at the intersection of 12th Street and Troost Avenue, where taxi drivers would usually rank and pick up passengers. After thanking him, the man ran over to a taxi, opened the driver's side door, and honked the horn aggressively to goad the driver out of a nearby restaurant. With his good deed complete for the night, Lane drove off, making his way home as the man waited impatiently by the roadside. With the news hitting the papers across the city, Lane had suspicions that it may have been Owen that he helped that night, so visited the local funeral home where his body was being kept. As he expected, the man had a deep cut on the same arm that he was holding that night, leading him to believe that this was Owen, so reported it to the police. Despite the similarities in injuries and the odd behaviour displayed by the man, detectives weren't convinced that this was Owen, mainly due to the fact that none of the hotel staff reported seeing him leave or return to the hotel that evening. Whilst it's possible that Owen could have ventured in and out undetected, the chances are that someone would have likely spotted a bloodied, shirtless man at some point in the night.
I think he saw something in the newspaper
limping
and was
through
like,
the corridors
I'm a
of the
taxi
president.
driver or something. Oh no.
However,
just driving? I don't know.
Other witnesses and reports that came forward confirmed that they had seen Owen in liquor stores and venues on 12th Street in the company of two women.
See?
So there's every possibility
I believe what the hotel
that it was
says.
Owen that he encountered that night.
I don't believe.
The identities of these two
Yeah,
women,
because the
however,
hotel would be like, yeah, he
unknown.
left a bunch of times. Oh, he did leave though.
Probst recalled the conversation with Owen
Interesting.
about the rates at the Muleback being too high, so police conferred with hotel staff to find more clues.
Now I'm
Interestingly,
confused. No, because he
nobody
left
by
at
the
two
name
separate
Roland
points.
T. Owen had visited the Muleback. Yet a man with the same description did stay under the name Eugene K. Scott, also claiming to be from Los Angeles, and just like at the President, he requested a room on the interior of the building, away from the view of the street. After checking the name with the LAPD, once again, Eugene K. Scott didn't exist. After a few days, the story broke nationwide. Phone calls and letters flooded the KCPD with suggestions of the man's identity, many of which were easily dismissed. Yet one came through that seemed to be a complete match. Upon the visitors of the body at the funeral home was Ernest Johnson, who claimed that the victim was his cousin, Harvey Johnson, and contacted his sister to come and identify the body. Whilst the resemblance was uncanny, she confirmed it wasn't him, especially since her brother had died 5 years prior. Another visitor was Tony Bernardi, a wrestling promoter from Arkansas, who identified the man as Cecil Werner. Tony claims that Cecil approached him in December looking for work as an amateur wrestler, so referred him on to another promoter, Charles Locke, in Omaha, Nebraska. Whilst this may have been the man that Tony Bernardi met, Charles Locke didn't recognise the victim as the man who wrestled for him. This link may suggest an explanation for the cauliflower ear condition that the victim had, since it's a common side effect for wrestlers who sustain severe blows and trauma to the auricle. Many people from across the country came to visit the body to try and help solve a fragment of this mystery,
especially if this
yet
guy's
none
Russian.
of them were able to provide any breakthroughs. Detectives were running out of witnesses to
I
question,
still think he's a
and none of the
Toot,
evidence
bro.
led to any further
You know what I'm
discoveries.
saying?
As the days passed by, the case soon began to turn cold, and it looked as though the murder in room 1046 may remain unsolved forever.
I think we solved it. Solved. March of this year? Just March in
On the
general.
3rd of March, it was announced by the funeral home that the body of the man in 1046 would be buried at a local potter's field the following day,
Oh.
to allow anyone
So,
who wished
John
to
Doe?
attend to pay respects. On that same day, they received a call from a man asking about the service. They requested that the funeral be delayed
Dawn.
so they could pay for a grave and service at Memorial Park Cemetery in Kansas City instead. And when asked why, the caller said,
He will be near my sister.
shocked at the thought that someone finally knew the victim, the funeral director told the caller that this conversation had to be reported to the police. Something he seemed completely unbothered by. Stunned by this development, the funeral director took it upon themselves to probe as many questions as possible to this potential new lead. They asked about the murder and why this man had been killed in the first place, to which the caller suggested that the man had been having an affair behind his fiance's back. The caller, plus the two women involved in this love triangle, claimed to have agreed to team up and corner him at the hotel to exact revenge, saying,
Cheaters usually get what's coming to them.
before hanging up. After reporting this incident to the police,
I believe it.
the funeral was delayed
What a
to see if the
twist.
caller
I thought
would
he was a Toot
indeed
the whole
send
time.
money to the home. 20 days later, $25 sealed in an envelope was anonymously sent to the funeral director, enough to cover the cost of the requested burial. Incredibly,
Yeah,
this
but
wasn't the
multiple
only phone
hotels,
call to
the
be
fake
made regarding
name.
the funeral. 2 separate calls via payphone were made to a local florist to arrange a bouquet of 13 American Beauty roses for the grave, with 2 envelopes containing $5 each to cover the bill. Included in one of the envelopes was a handwritten note which read, "Love forever, Louise." Police now strongly believed that the love affair story could be true, as the amounts paid to make reconsiderations for this burial would come to a total
Hi.
of around $840 in today's money, an
God
unlikely
damn.
amount of cash to waste on a hoax. On the day of the funeral, other than the Reverend, all attendees of the service were undercover detectives, disguised as either pallbearers or gravediggers, hoping for the anonymous donors to show up and pay their respects to the dead. Despite staying for the entire service, as well as staking out the grave over the next several days, nobody else came to visit. However, a mere few days later, another twist would occur after a newspaper article incorrectly reported that the mystery man was buried in a pauper's grave. A woman called in to clarify that he had instead been given a formal funeral, confirming that even the flower shop where the roses were bought would be able to validate this. When questioned on who she was and how she knew, she responded with,
Never mind. I know what I'm talking about. He got into a jam.
before hanging up the call. At this point in the case, we're left with once again even more questions to add to the list, and very few answers.
I believe
Was Owen the man that Robert Lane picked up in his car on the second night?
it. No.
If so,
Yeah.
how
Yeah?
did he
No.
get in and out of his room unseen? And who attacked him?
He did leave a few times.
Did the call girl meet Owen, or at least intend to see him that evening? Who were the mystery funeral donors? And who is Louise?
Coco set him up. They called
With
the
these
Coco.
questions left frustratingly
No.
unanswered, it feels as though we may never solve this puzzle without at least one of these pieces falling into place. If only someone could verify who this person was,
I believe
at least we would have somewhere to start. Some place to begin to unravel the rest of this mystery.
So
We
fake
just need
to
one clue.
the girl he cheated
A
with,
hint.
the girl's brother.
Anything to...
What? Nay.
In the month of May that year, the American Weekly magazine dedicated a large portion of its edition retelling the story, titled The Mystery of Room Number 1046. Sharing the various aspects of the murder, it also included a photograph they had somehow obtained of the victim lying on the coroner's table. A year and a half after this was published, in late 1936, a woman from Birmingham, Alabama, came across the article and thought she recognised the image of the man, who she had not seen for over 2 years. She believed it looked like her friend's son, so stopped by to visit and showed her the magazine. Ruby Ogletree reluctantly turned the pages of the publication to reveal every mother's worst fear. Her son, who she hadn't heard from for over a year, was the man who was murdered in room 1046.
What?
After almost 2 long, agonising years, the world finally had the first piece to this curious, complex and cryptic enigma. At last, a breakthrough in the case, and the name of the man whose identity had haunted the hotel was now finally known. That man's name
So reverse engineer
was
the people.
Artemis Ogletree. In April of 1934, Artemis Ogletree left his hometown to hitchhike to California
Artemis
and had
is a pretty cool
regularly
name.
kept in touch with his mother via mail. Ruby was able to confirm for certain that this man was her son, as the unique scar on his scalp was the result of an accidental burn from hot grease when he was a child. She was also able to confirm that he was actually only 17 years old, despite looking older to others who had met him in Kansas City. Whilst the identification helped solve a significant
So
question
back
in this
to
case,
the Toot then.
it would ultimately lead to another that was much more sinister. You see, despite being murdered in January 1935, Ruby still received post from Artemis in the months after his death. The first of these was sent from Chicago and was received in early 1935. Ruby had already been suspicious of this note as it had been typewritten rather than by hand, and as far as she was aware, her son didn't know how to use a typewriter. The language also felt very different than the previous ones she had received, speaking with words that he wasn't accustomed to using, giving her more reason at the time to believe it may not have been him who was writing to her. Another letter from New York suggested he was travelling to Europe, followed by another saying his ship had sailed that day. Even stranger still,
The
Ruby received a
handwritings
phone
don't
call
match
in
up.
August from a man in Memphis,
Her?
Tennessee,
Yeah, whatever.
who
It's
expressed
typed,
his
she's
gratitude
like,
for her son saving his life in a fight. He claimed that Artemis was now married and living in Cairo, Egypt, and that he wouldn't be writing to his mother anymore due to losing one of his thumbs in a scrap. Ruby managed to get the caller's name and gave it to the police, but that name has never been made public knowledge.
yeah, fake name,
The
right?
reason for these hoax letters and
What the
calls
hell?
was likely an effort by the suspect to prevent Ruby from ever finding out about her son's recent murder. If Ruby believed that Artemis was alive and well, living away in a far distant land with her family, she may never look deeply into the case in room 1046, or even make the connection that the mysterious man could be her son. Also,
So now it's
quick
someone who
aside,
knows the
but somewhat
mom
remarkably,
and the son.
the name Artemis
You know what I'm
Ogletree
saying?
is an anagram of a gruesome letter. Completely coincidental, yet fascinating and quite spooky in the context of this story. Ruby worked with
How
the
long did
Kansas
it take
City
to figure
police
that out?
to
I
try
don't
and
know
piece
how to do
together more
this.
information that could help with their case,
Now
and was
my
able
mother,
to confirm that Artemis had stayed
tree?
in not only the President and the Muhlbach,
Motree.
but also the St. Regis Hotel on Linwood Boulevard, located around a 15-minute drive away from the
Words.
President. police discovered that he had stayed at the St. Regis around the same time and had shared a room with another man. Whilst they were unable to confirm who this person
Don.
was,
Back to
many believed
politician.
that this could have been the elusive Don, and possibly the man who killed Artemis Ogletree.
Maybe
In
not
fact,
even.
in 1937, a few years on from the
Guy
events in
had
Kansas City,
$5. He
this
gave
mysterious
35
Don
for the whole funeral.
may have actually been found when
And
a
that was
man
equivalent
named
to
Joseph
800,
Martin
9?
was arrested for murder in New York.
Which is wild for
After
back
killing
then.
a man he had been sharing a hotel room with and found attempting to ship the body to Memphis, it was discovered that he had been using multiple aliases to hide his identity. One of these aliases was Donald Kelso, or Don for short. Kansas City Police, hoping to prove Martin as the murderer of Ogletree, requested samples of his handwriting to see if any similarities were present with the numerous letters written to Ruby. Remarkably, the two seemed to be a match. Yet for some reason, after further investigation, no charges were filed against him for the murder. It's possible that there may have been conclusive evidence to suggest that Martin couldn't have been the murderer, yet I find it bizarre that there seems to be nothing publicly that states what that reason is. Not only do we now have a man convicted of murdering someone else in similar circumstances, using the same name and with matching handwriting to the phony letters, but he was also attempting to transfer the body to Memphis, the same place where Ruby had received the mysterious phone call about her son's whereabouts. Nevertheless, it's at this point in the story where the leads dry up, and the case ultimately goes cold, with no further clues or evidence cropping
it's
up.
that guy, Kelso.
However, there is one more small
Give it to
chapter
me.
to this story.
Small chapter. Make
In
it a
February
book.
2012, a local historian named
my
John
God.
Horner, who worked at the Kansas City Public Library, wrote a 2-part blog detailing the many different facets of this case. At the very end of the write-up, just as it looks to conclude with the case remaining unsolved, the last 5 sentences reveal a final twist in the tale, with potentially a fresh new
8 or
lead
9 years
to
ago,
help
an
solve the
adventure
mystery.
The library
Whilst
sold in
working at
North
the
Half,
library,
education building
Horner
in
received a
Missouri.
phone call from a person asking about the Ogletree case. They had been helping clear the belongings of an elderly person who had recently died, and found a box containing several newspaper clippings about the story, as well as an item that was mentioned in the case. When Horner asked what that item was, the caller, for some reason, refrained from answering. And that is where the story of Artemis Ogletree and the murder in room 1046 currently stands. After 90
weapon
years,
or
we have no
shampoo
definitive
bubble?
answers as to who murdered Ogletree and why, yet there are plenty of theories that have been speculated based on the evidence that we know of. Let's explore just a few of them. First of all, as we have already discussed, Joseph Martin, who went by the name Donald Kelso, is high on my list of suspects,
I believe it.
and for me, is likely to be the missing piece to this puzzle. If he isn't directly responsible for the death of Ogletree, there is a high possibility that he at least helped cover the tracks of whoever is. During his stay at the President, we know that Ogletree had been communicating with a man named Don via notes in his room and over the telephone. Perhaps this Don and Ogletree were involved in some sort of illegal
Doesn't the
business,
hotel
requiring them to constantly stay in
track
hiding
calls?
and move between various hotels in the city to keep their activities discreet? Or perhaps they were 2 friends who met during their travels that got into a drunken brawl that had got out of hand, leading to Ogletree meeting his fate. Regardless of the finer details, the absence of Don after the murder suggests to me that there is at least something that this mysterious man is hiding. The story surrounding the possible love triangle between Ogletree, his fiancée and his lover is also a favourite amongst theorists, looking for probable cause and motive for murder. Many believe that the two women involved in Ogletree's love life conspired together and enacted revenge on him for his infidelity, possibly even with the help of another man.
Still the Toot
It's
one.
unclear if anyone in
But for
Ogletree's
this,
close
it would just
circles even knew
throw
he was engaged to marry,
people
and whether or
off.
not that person was the Louise
'Cause
who
it's like,
sent
why would they
flowers for
still
his
pay for
funeral.
it?
We have no clear evidence that he was being unfaithful whilst in a relationship, other than perhaps the occasion when the call girl attempted to visit room
You know what I'm
1046 on the
saying?
3rd of January. Yet we can't even be sure that she was scheduled to meet
don't
Ogletree
believe
at
it.
all.
I'm gonna go with the
There
Toot.
is, however, a moment in the timeline where Ogletree is
Don's a
seen
politician.
in the company of two women
Or just has money.
outside liquor
Wants to
stores on
keep that
12th
guy's mouth
Street,
shut? No idea.
and picked up not long after by Robert Lane, bloodied and dishevelled after some sort of confrontation. Could this have been his fiancée and lover, confronting him for the first time and exposing him for his treachery?
Yeah, but then who was...
A final theory, once again, involves the call girl, along with the man she took up to the 9th floor of the President during Ogletree's second night stay. Whilst much more outlandish
Yeah,
than the
'cause he was already
previous
fucked up by
theories,
the third, huh?
consider this,
Whoa.
if you will. Let's assume Ogletree is in some way involved in some sort of criminal underworld, or perhaps been caught being unfaithful to his now vengeful ex-fiancée. If murder was on the minds of those who wanted to enact some form of retribution, how could you get close to Ogletree without raising suspicion? Could it be possible that the call girl, along with a hired gun, were paid to do the job? Remember, this woman was looking for her client in room 1046
No, but why was
before
he
suggesting
there in the
he
first
wasn't
place?
present in his room,
I think he was...
eventually returning to the 9th with an unknown man before both
This is
leaving
in
roughly 15
1930,
minutes
bro?
apart.
I don't know.
Suppose they had been working together, and she was sent to scope the 10th floor in advance
I
of
must
her
believe it more
accomplice.
because it was 1930.
There was a huge party going on that night in room 1055, leading to many potential
that's what I
and
was like.
unwanted witnesses to the crime. Waiting until late into the night for the party to disperse, both took the elevator to the 9th floor, pretending to make their way to a room in view of Blotcher, before secretly taking the stairs up to the 10th. After torturing Ogletree in 1046, they would lock the door behind them and leave the same way they came. With 15 minutes between their departures, one after the other, the pair would make their way down to the 9th, take the lift down to the lobby, and disappear into the night.
That one makes it sound cool. That is wild. I don't know. He died in the bathtub. I'm gonna have to go with...
Of course, we can
Toot.
never truly know what happened in room 1046. And despite
Is
all the
this
possible
the video?
suspects, evidence and leads,
Oh?
half-baked theories on Ogletree's fate is all we have left to ponder.
Oh, half-baked?
With the case occurring almost 90 years ago to this date, it's likely that most of the people who were working, residing, and passing through the hotel that week have been lost to time, meaning the answers to the questions in this case will no doubt follow suit. The hotel president itself remains the only existing remnant of this
Why
deeply
didn't
troubling
they
story,
keep enough?
with room 1046 hiding its sinister secret from the many oblivious guests
Well, I guess
who
you're
have
not
come to
supposed to
stay
just like...
over the years.
But if you go into a hotel, you
Since
should...
starting this channel, I've seen many
The
historic
ID?
cases
I don't
like
know, did
this
they do
remain
that? I
unsolved
think it should be a
and
rule.
unanswered. But that doesn't mean that one should give up hope that this will haunt our minds forever.
Huh, that is wild.
Whether it be an unlikely clue, a new piece of evidence, or an advancement in forensic analysis, there is still a chance that perhaps one day new light will be shed onto this dark, enduring mystery.
Whoa. That was amazing.